The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Princess Charlotte made her way to the royal gardens. At just 8 years old, she carried herself with the grace expected of royalty. But today, something was different. Her usual bright smile was replaced by worried lines across her young face. Charlotte had always been the joy of the kingdom. Unlike her older brother, who spent his days learning about politics and warfare, she preferred the company of the palace staff and the common people who worked within the castle walls. The servants adored her gentle nature and kind heart, often saying she would grow up to be a queen who truly cared for her people. But today, Charlotte carried a heavy secret that made her small shoulders shake with fear. 3 days ago, she had overheard a conversation that chilled her to the bone. Hidden behind a tapestry in the Great Hall, she had listened as her uncle, Duke Edmund, spoke in hushed tones with a group of men she didn't recognize. "The king grows weaker each day," her uncle had whispered. "Soon he will be unable to rule, and the crown will need strong hands to guide it. The princess is too young, and the prince, well, he lacks the wisdom needed for such times." Charlotte didn't fully understand all the words, but she knew enough to realize that her uncle was planning something terrible. She had heard him mention removing obstacles and clearing the path to the throne. The way he spoke about her father, King William, made her stomach twist with worry. For 3 nights, she had barely slept. She wanted to tell someone, but who could she trust? Her father had been ill recently, spending most of his time in his chambers with the royal doctors. Her mother, the queen, was constantly worried about the king's health and seemed too stressed to listen to what might sound like a child's imagination. As Charlotte walked through the gardens, she noticed Sir Marcus, the head of the royal guard, practicing his sword work near the training grounds. Sir Marcus had been protecting the royal family for over 15 years. He was a tall, strong man with kind eyes and a gentle voice that made Charlotte feel safe whenever he was around. Charlotte had always admired Sir Marcus. Unlike some of the other guards who treated her with formal distance, he would sometimes share stories of his adventures or listen to her talk about her favorite books. He had a daughter of his own who was about Charlotte's age, and perhaps that's why he understood children better than most adults in the palace. But even as she watched him practice, doubt crept into Charlotte's mind. Her uncle was a powerful man in the kingdom, and Sir Marcus worked for the royal family. What if Sir Marcus felt he had to be loyal to whoever might rule next? What if he didn't believe her? What if he thought she was just a scared little girl making up stories? Charlotte remembered overhearing the kitchen maids talking about how Uncle Edmund had been gaining influence among some of the nobles. They whispered about meetings held in secret, and how some people thought he would be a stronger leader than her gentle father. If Uncle Edmund had supporters even among the palace staff, could she really trust anyone? As she stood there watching Sir Marcus, Charlotte felt smaller and more alone than ever before. The weight of what she knew pressed down on her like a heavy blanket. She thought about her father lying sick in his bed, trusting the people around him to keep him safe. She thought about her mother, already worried sick about losing her husband. And she thought about her brother, who was away studying in a neighboring kingdom and had no idea what was happening at home. The morning breeze rustled through the garden flowers, and Charlotte made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't carry this burden alone anymore. Whether Sir Marcus believed her or not, whether he helped her or not, she had to try. Her family's life might depend on it. Taking a deep breath, Charlotte straightened her shoulders and began walking toward the training grounds. With each step, her heart beat faster, but her resolve grew stronger. She was just a little girl, but she was also a princess, and princesses were supposed to protect their kingdoms and their families. Sir Marcus noticed her approach and immediately stopped his practice, bowing respectfully as she came near. "Good morning, Your Highness," he said with his usual warm smile. "You're up early today. Is everything all right?" Charlotte looked up at him, her green eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. This was the moment that would test not just her courage, but also the loyalty and honor of the man who had sworn to protect her family. In the next few minutes, she would discover whether the royal guard would stand by their oath or whether the unthinkable would happen. The fate of the kingdom rested in the hands of a frightened 8-year-old girl and the choices that would be made in the moments to come. Charlotte's hands trembled as she looked up at Sir Marcus. The morning air felt cold against her skin, even though the sun was shining brightly overhead. She had practiced this moment in her mind dozens of times, but now that she was here, the words seemed stuck in her throat. Sir Marcus, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to tell you something very important, but I'm scared you won't believe me. Sir Marcus immediately knelt down to her level, his face showing genuine concern. This was one of the things Charlotte had always liked about him. He never made her feel like her thoughts and feelings didn't matter just because she was young. Princess Charlotte, you can tell me anything, he said gently. I've sworn an oath to protect you and your family, and that includes listening when you're worried about something. Charlotte took a shaky breath and began to tell him everything she had overheard. She described hiding behind the tapestry, her uncle's whispered conversation with the strange men, and the frightening words about removing obstacles and clearing paths to the throne. As she spoke, she watched Sir Marcus's face carefully, looking for any sign of disbelief or dismissal. But instead of the doubt she expected to see, Sir Marcus's expression grew increasingly serious. His jaw tightened and his eyes became sharp and focused. When Charlotte finished her story, he was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly working through what she had told him. Princess, this is very serious, he said finally. I want you to know that I believe you completely. You're a smart, honest child, and I've seen enough palace politics to know that what you've described is not only possible, but dangerous. Relief flooded through Charlotte so powerfully that she almost started crying. Someone believed her, someone was taking her seriously. But then Sir Marcus said something that made her stomach drop again. However, we have a big problem. Your uncle has been building alliances among some of the guards and several noble families. I've been watching these developments with growing concern, but I didn't realize how far his plans had progressed. Charlotte felt her heart sink. Does that mean you can't help? Are you afraid of my uncle too? Sir Marcus's eyes flashed with something that looked almost like anger, but Charlotte could tell it wasn't directed at her. Princess, I want you to understand something very clearly. I swore an oath to protect your father, the rightful king, and his family. That oath doesn't change based on who has more power or influence. Your uncle may have supporters, but he doesn't have my loyalty, and he never will. The certainty in his voice made Charlotte feel stronger, but she could see that Sir Marcus was troubled by something else. The challenge we face, he continued, is that we need proof of your uncle's plans. Right now, we have your word about a conversation you overheard, which is valuable, but it might not be enough to convince others or to take action against such a powerful man. Charlotte nodded, understanding the problem even though it frustrated her. In the adult world, apparently even a princess's word wasn't always enough. What can we do? She asked. Sir Marcus stood up and began pacing slowly, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword out of habit. We need to be very careful and very smart. Your uncle cannot know that we're aware of his plans, or he might accelerate his timeline or change his methods. He stopped pacing and looked directly at Charlotte. I'm going to need you to be braver than any 8-year-old should ever have to be. Are you willing to help gather the evidence we need? Charlotte's first instinct was to say yes immediately, but something in Sir Marcus's tone made her pause. She could tell that whatever he was asking would be dangerous. What would I need to do? She asked. I need you to continue acting normally around your uncle, but keep your ears open for any more conversations. If you can find out when and where his next meeting will take place, I might be able to position myself to overhear it directly. Charlotte thought about this request. It meant she would have to be around her uncle, knowing what she now knew and pretend that everything was normal. It meant potentially putting herself in danger if he discovered what she was doing. But then she thought about her father, weak and trusting in his sickbed. She thought about her mother's worried face and her brother, far away and unaware of the danger. She thought about all the people in the kingdom who depended on her family to protect them. I'll do it, she said, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. Sir Marcus smiled at her, and for the first time since this conversation began, his expression held a note of hope. You're very brave, Princess Charlotte, but I want you to promise me something. If at any point you feel unsafe or if your uncle seems suspicious of you, you come to me immediately. No matter what time of day or night you find me, Charlotte nodded solemnly. I promise. Good. Now we also need to think about who else we can trust. I have a few guards who I know are completely loyal to your father. But we need to be very selective about who we bring into this. As they talked, Charlotte felt like she was stepping into a different world. A world where children had to make adult decisions, and where the people you trusted most might be the ones planning to hurt you. It was scary, but it was also the world she lived in, and hiding from it wouldn't make it go away. Sir Marcus gave her detailed instructions about how to safely gather information and established secret signals they could use to communicate. As their meeting came to an end, Charlotte realized that her life had just changed forever. She was no longer just a princess learning to be royal. She was now a spy trying to save her family and her kingdom. The weight of responsibility felt heavy on her young shoulders, but for the first time in days, she didn't feel alone. The next 3 days passed like a strange dream for Charlotte. She went about her normal routine, lessons with her tutor, meals with the family, and playtime in the gardens. But everything felt different now that she was carrying such a dangerous secret. Her uncle Edmund visited the palace daily, as he always had, but now Charlotte found herself studying his every move and expression. She noticed things she had never paid attention to before. How his eyes would scan the room when he thought no one was looking. How he would have quiet conversations with certain servants, and how he always seemed to know more about her father's condition than he should. During family dinners, Charlotte had to force herself to act naturally when her uncle spoke to her. He would ask about her studies or compliment her dress, and she would smile and answer politely while her heart raced with the knowledge of what he was planning. "You seem quieter than usual." "Little princess," her uncle said during dinner on the third night. "Are you feeling well?" Charlotte's mother looked up with concern. "Now that you mention it, Charlotte has seemed a bit subdued lately." Perhaps she's worried about her father. "I'm fine," Charlotte said quickly, managing a smile. "Just thinking about my lessons." Her uncle studied her face for a moment that felt like an eternity. "Well, don't let your studies trouble you too much. Children should enjoy their childhood while they can. Life becomes much more complicated when you grow up." Something in the way he said those words made Charlotte's skin crawl, but she nodded and continued eating her soup as if nothing was wrong. Later that evening, Charlotte was reading in the library when she heard footsteps in the hallway outside. She recognized her uncle's voice talking to someone, so she quietly moved closer to the door to listen. "The king's condition is worsening faster than expected," her uncle was saying. "The doctors say he may not last through the winter. We need to be ready to act quickly when the time comes." "What about the queen?" asked an unfamiliar voice. "She still has significant influence among the nobles." "The queen will be too grief-stricken to interfere," her uncle replied coldly. "And besides, she's never been interested in politics. She'll be easy enough to manage." Charlotte's hands clenched into fists as she heard them discussing her parents like they were just obstacles to be removed or managed. But she forced herself to keep listening. "And the children?" the stranger asked. "The boy is far away at his studies and won't return for months. By then everything will be settled. As for the girl, she's just a child. No one will expect her to have any say in matters of succession." Charlotte felt a flash of anger at being dismissed so easily, but she also realized this might work to her advantage. If her uncle didn't see her as a threat, he might be less careful about what he said around her. "When do we make our move?" the stranger continued. "Soon. I've arranged a meeting tomorrow night with our supporters. We'll finalize the details then. Meet me in the old wine cellar at midnight. Make sure you're not followed." Charlotte's heart leaped. This was exactly the information Sir Marcus needed. She carefully moved away from the door and pretended to be reading when the footsteps approached the library. Her uncle peeked in and smiled at her. "Still studying, I see. You're a dedicated young scholar." "I like reading," Charlotte replied, proud that her voice sounded steady. "Keep up the good work. Knowledge is power, as they say." After he left, Charlotte waited several minutes before closing her book and heading to her room. But instead of going to sleep, she snuck out through a secret passage she had discovered months ago during a game of hide-and-seek. The passage led to the servants' quarters, and from there she could make her way to the guards' barracks without being seen. She found Sir Marcus reviewing duty schedules in his office. When she knocked softly on his door, he looked surprised but quickly ushered her inside. "Princess, what are you doing here so late? Is everything all right?" Charlotte quickly told him about the conversation she had overheard, including the detail about the meeting in the wine cellar at midnight the following night. Sir Marcus's eyes lit up with approval. "Excellent work, Princess. This is exactly what we needed. Now we can gather evidence of their actual plans." "What will you do?" Charlotte asked. "I'll position myself in the wine cellar before they arrive. There are several hiding spots down there where I can listen to everything without being seen. Once I have proof of their conspiracy, We can take action to protect your father and stop their plans." Charlotte felt a surge of hope, but then a worrying thought occurred to her. What if they discover you're there? What if it's a trap? Sir Marcus considered this seriously. It's a risk, but it's one I have to take. However, you raise a good point about being careful. I'll bring 2 of my most trusted guards as backup, and we'll have an escape plan ready. He knelt down to her level again. Princess, I want you to know how proud I am of your courage. You've done something incredibly brave and important, but now I need you to promise me that you'll stay safe tomorrow night. Whatever happens, you must remain in your room and not try to follow or help. Charlotte wanted to argue, but she could see the wisdom in his words. She had done her part by gathering the information. Now it was time for the adults to handle the dangerous work. I promise, she said. But you have to promise me something too. Promise you'll be careful and that you'll stop my uncle from hurting my family. Sir Marcus placed his hand over his heart. I swear to you, Princess Charlotte, on my honor as a knight and a protector of this realm, that I will do everything in my power to keep your family safe. As Charlotte made her way back to her room through the secret passage, she felt the weight of anticipation settling over her. Tomorrow night would determine the fate of everyone she loved. She had done everything she could to help, and now all she could do was wait and hope that Sir Marcus would be able to stop her uncle's terrible plans. Sleep came slowly that night, filled with dreams of dark cellars and whispered conspiracies, but also with the steady presence of a loyal guard who had sworn to protect her family no matter what the cost. The day of the midnight meeting crawled by with agonizing slowness. Charlotte tried to maintain her normal routine, but everything felt like an act. During her morning lessons, she could barely concentrate on her mathematics. At lunch, food tasted like sand in her mouth. Even her favorite afternoon activity of painting in the gardens couldn't distract her from the nervous energy buzzing through her body. Her uncle appeared at the palace around midday, as he had been doing regularly. Charlotte watched him from her bedroom window as he spoke with various servants and guards in the courtyard below. She noticed that some of the people he talked to would nod seriously and then glance around to make sure no one was watching their conversation. During dinner, the tension was almost unbearable. Charlotte's father was too ill to join them, so it was just her mother, and her uncle at the large dining table. The Queen seemed distracted, constantly worrying about her husband's health, while Uncle Edmund was unusually talkative and cheerful. The kingdom seems to be running smoothly despite the king's illness, he remarked to the Queen. The people have confidence in the royal family's strength. William is getting better, the Queen replied firmly. The doctors say he just needs rest. Of course, Uncle Edmund agreed, but Charlotte caught the look in his eyes that suggested he thought otherwise. Still, it's good to know that the kingdom would be in capable hands if anything were to happen. Charlotte excused herself from dinner early, claiming she felt tired. As she walked to her room, she passed Sir Marcus in the hallway. They didn't speak, but he gave her a subtle nod that told her he was ready for the night ahead. In her bedroom, Charlotte tried to read, but the words swam before her eyes. She attempted to work on her embroidery, but her hands shook too much to make neat stitches. Finally, she gave up on any activities and simply sat by her window, watching the sun slowly set behind the palace walls. As darkness fell, Charlotte could see torches being lit around the palace grounds. She knew that somewhere below, Sir Marcus was preparing for the most important mission of his career. The fate of her family, possibly the entire kingdom, would be decided in the next few hours. Around 11 o'clock, Charlotte saw her uncle's figure moving across the courtyard toward the castle's lower levels, where the wine cellar was located. Her heart started beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. She pressed her face against the cool glass of her window and tried to spot Sir Marcus, but he was already well hidden. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Charlotte found herself holding her breath without realizing it, then gasping for air when she remembered to breathe. She had never felt so helpless in her life. All she could do was wait and hope that Sir Marcus would be able to gather the evidence they needed without being discovered. Midnight came and went. Charlotte remained at her window, straining her eyes to see any sign of what was happening below. The palace seemed eerily quiet, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Then at midnight, Charlotte saw something that made her blood run cold. More figures were moving across the courtyard, but these were not the conspirators Sir Marcus had expected. Instead, she could see Uncle Edmund leading a group of armed guards toward the main palace entrance. Panic shot through Charlotte like lightning. Something had gone terribly wrong. Either Sir Marcus had been discovered, or this was a different part of her uncle's plan that they hadn't anticipated. Either way, her family was in immediate danger. Charlotte's mind raced as she tried to decide what to do. Sir Marcus had made her promise to stay in her room, but he had also sworn to protect her family. If he was captured or unable to help, then she might be the only one who could warn her parents. Without stopping to think about the consequences, Charlotte grabbed a warm cloak and slipped out of her room. She knew the palace better than almost anyone, including several secret passages that the adults had forgotten about over the years. If she was careful and quiet, she could reach her parents' chambers without being seen by her uncle's men. Moving through the shadows like a ghost, Charlotte made her way down corridors she had played in her entire life. But tonight these familiar halls felt dangerous and foreign. Every shadow could be hiding an enemy. Every sound could mean discovery. As she approached her parents' wing of the palace, she could hear heavy footsteps and voices coming from that direction. Her heart sank as she realized that her uncle's men were already there. She was too late to warn her parents, but maybe she could still do something to help. Creeping closer, Charlotte positioned herself behind a large tapestry where she could see and hear what was happening. Her uncle stood in the hallway outside her parents' bedroom, flanked by 6 armed guards. The Queen was there too, wearing her nightgown and looking confused and frightened. "Edmund, what is the meaning of this?" the Queen demanded. "Why are there armed men in my home?" "I'm sorry, sister-in-law, but this is necessary for the good of the kingdom," Uncle Edmund replied with fake sympathy. "William's condition has deteriorated beyond recovery. The kingdom needs strong leadership, and I'm afraid you and the children are not equipped to provide it." "You're talking about treason," the Queen said, her voice shaking with anger and fear. "I'm talking about saving the kingdom from chaos," Uncle Edmund corrected. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Charlotte watched in horror as her uncle gave a signal to his men. 2 guards moved toward her mother, while others headed into her parents' bedroom where her sick father lay sleeping. This was really happening. Her uncle was taking over the palace, and there was no sign of Sir Marcus or his loyal guards. Terror and desperation filled Charlotte's mind. But underneath those feelings, something else was growing. A fierce determination to protect her family. She was just 8 years old, but she was also a princess, and sometimes being a princess meant fighting for what was right, even when you were afraid. Hidden behind the tapestry, Charlotte began to form a plan. It was dangerous and probably impossible, but it was the only chance her family had. She thought about Sir Marcus and hoped he was still alive somewhere. She thought about her promise to stay safe, and then she thought about her family being hurt or killed while she hid in the shadows. The choice was clear. Charlotte was about to do something that would either save her family or get them all killed, but she couldn't live with herself if she didn't try. Charlotte's plan was born from desperation, and the kind of thinking that only comes to children who haven't yet learned that some things are impossible. She remembered something her tutor had taught her about the palace's history. There was an ancient bell in the highest tower that had once been used to warn the kingdom of attacks. The bell hadn't been rung in over 50 years, but if she could reach it and ring it now, it would wake everyone in the palace and possibly alert loyal guards who weren't part of her uncle's conspiracy. The problem was getting to the tower without being caught. The route would take her through parts of the palace that were now crawling with her uncle's men. But Charlotte knew something they didn't. The palace had been built with secret passages designed to help the royal family escape during sieges. Her grandfather had shown her some of these passages when she was younger, calling them our family's greatest secret. Moving as quietly as a mouse, Charlotte backed away from the tapestry and began making her way toward the oldest part of the palace. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she heard her uncle's voice echoing through the halls, giving orders to his men about securing all entrances and exits. The passage she needed was hidden behind a bookshelf in the old library. Charlotte had discovered it by accident months ago, while looking for a book that had fallen behind the shelf. She had explored it a little but never gone very far. Tonight she would have to trust that it led where she hoped it did. Finding the hidden lever that moved the bookshelf, Charlotte slipped into the narrow passage beyond. The air was stale and dusty, and spiderwebs brushed against her face as she felt her way forward in the darkness. The passage was so narrow that she had to move sideways in some places, and so low that she had to crawl on her hands and knees through others. As she climbed upward through the winding passage, Charlotte could hear the sounds of her uncle's takeover echoing through the walls. Shouts of confusion, running footsteps, and the clash of weapons told her that some guards were fighting back. But she had no way of knowing if they were winning or losing. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Charlotte emerged from the passage into a small room she had never seen before. Moonlight streamed through a tiny window, and she could see a spiral staircase leading upward. Her heart leaped with hope. This had to be the way to the bell tower. The climb up the spiral staircase was exhausting for her small legs, but Charlotte pushed herself onward. Each step brought her closer to the only plan she had to save her family. She tried not to think about what would happen if her uncle's men discovered what she was doing, or what would happen if the bell didn't work after all these years. Finally, she reached the top of the tower. The bell hung in the center of a small room with windows facing all directions. It was larger than Charlotte had expected, made of bronze that had turned green with age. A thick rope hung down from the bell's mounting, and Charlotte realized with dismay that it was much higher than she could reach, even jumping. Panic started to set in until Charlotte noticed a wooden ladder leaning against one wall. Someone must have used it for maintenance years ago and forgotten it there. With great effort, Charlotte dragged the heavy ladder across the room and positioned it under the bell rope. Climbing the ladder with shaking hands, Charlotte finally managed to grasp the rope. It was rough and dusty and much heavier than she had expected. When she pulled on it, nothing happened at first. She pulled harder, using all her weight, and finally heard a deep, resonant sound that seemed to shake the entire tower. The sound was so loud and startling that Charlotte almost fell off the ladder, but she held on and continued pulling the rope with all her strength. The bell's voice rang out across the palace and the surrounding countryside, a sound that hadn't been heard in decades. Below in the palace, the effect was immediate and dramatic. Uncle Edmund's men stopped what they were doing and looked around in confusion and alarm. Many of them had never heard the warning bell and didn't know what it meant, but they knew it meant something important was happening. More importantly, the bell woke loyal guards who had been sleeping in their quarters, unaware of the conspiracy taking place. It also alerted servants and nobles who lived in the palace, creating chaos and confusion that worked against Uncle Edmund's carefully planned takeover. Charlotte continued ringing the bell until her arms ached, and she could barely hold onto the rope. The sound carried far beyond the palace walls, reaching the town below and the surrounding countryside. People who heard it would know that something was seriously wrong at the palace. As the last echoes of the bell faded away, Charlotte heard new sounds from below, the sounds of fighting, but different from before. These were the sounds of a real battle, with many people involved rather than just a few guards being surprised by conspirators. Exhausted and frightened, Charlotte climbed down from the ladder and looked out the tower windows. What she saw filled her with hope. Torches were moving throughout the palace grounds as guards and servants emerged from their quarters. In the distance, she could see riders approaching from the town, probably nobles and guard reinforcements who had heard the warning bell. But Charlotte's relief was short-lived. Heavy footsteps on the spiral staircase told her that someone was coming up to the tower, and she doubted it was anyone friendly. She had succeeded in calling for help, but now she was trapped at the top of the tower with nowhere to run. The footsteps grew closer, and Charlotte pressed herself against the wall, trying to become invisible. She had done everything she could think of to save her family. Now all she could do was hope that the help she had summoned would arrive in time, and that somehow she would survive long enough to see her family safe again. The sound of someone reaching the top of the stairs echoed through the small tower room. Charlotte held her breath and waited to see whether the person climbing toward her was friend or enemy, knowing that her fate, and possibly her family's fate, hung in the balance. The figure that emerged into the tower room was not one of her uncle's conspirators, but Sir Marcus himself. His armor was dented and blood-stained, and he had a cut across his left cheek, but his eyes lit up with relief when he saw Charlotte crouched against the wall. "Princess!" he exclaimed, rushing to her side. "Thank the heavens you're safe." That was incredibly brave, but also incredibly dangerous. "What were you thinking?" Charlotte threw her arms around him, not caring that his armor was cold and uncomfortable. "Sir Marcus, I thought you were captured or dead. I saw my uncle with his men going to my parents' rooms and I didn't know what else to do." "You did exactly the right thing," Sir Marcus said, his voice filled with admiration and concern. "That bell saved more lives tonight than you'll ever know. But we need to get you to safety immediately. As they hurried down the spiral staircase, Sir Marcus explained what had happened. The meeting in the wine cellar had been a trap. Uncle Edmund had discovered that Charlotte and Sir Marcus were working together, possibly through one of his spies among the palace staff. Sir Marcus and his 2 trusted guards had been captured and locked in the cellar. "How did you escape?" Charlotte asked as they navigated the narrow passage back through the palace walls. "When your bell rang, it created confusion among the guards your uncle had posted. In the chaos, we managed to overpower them and escape. But more importantly, the bell woke up guards throughout the palace who were still loyal to your father. It also brought help from outside, nobles and reinforcements who heard the warning and came immediately. They emerged from the secret passage into the main part of the palace, and Charlotte was amazed by what she saw. The halls that had been controlled by her uncle just an hour ago were now filled with loyal guards and concerned nobles. The conspiracy had collapsed in the face of organized resistance. "Where are my parents?" Charlotte asked urgently. "Safe," Sir Marcus assured her. "Your mother is with your father in their chambers, protected by our most trusted guards. Your uncle's men never had a chance to harm them thanks to your warning." As they made their way through the palace, Charlotte saw several of her uncle's conspirators being led away in chains. Some she recognized as guards she had seen around the palace for years, and it made her sad to realize how many people had been willing to betray her family for power or money. They found the queen in the royal chambers, sitting beside the king's bed and holding his hand. When she saw Charlotte, tears of relief streamed down her face. "Charlotte, oh my brave, foolish girl," the queen cried, pulling her daughter into a fierce embrace. "Sir Marcus told me what you did. You saved us all, but you could have been killed." Charlotte looked over at her father, who was awake despite his illness. He was pale and weak, but his eyes were clear and focused on his daughter. "Come here, little princess," he said, in a voice that was soft but steady. Charlotte approached the bed, and her father took her hand in his trembling one. "Sir Marcus has told me about your courage these past few days," the king said. "You showed wisdom beyond your years and bravery that would make any knight proud. But most importantly, you showed loyalty to your family and your kingdom." "I was scared," Charlotte admitted. "I didn't know if anyone would believe me or help me." "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," her father replied. "It means you do what's right even when you are scared." "You've learned a lesson tonight that many adults never learn," Sir Marcus stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we've captured most of the conspirators, including Duke Edmund. He's being held in the palace dungeon awaiting trial." The king nodded gravely. "My brother chose his path, and now he must face the consequences. Make sure he's treated fairly, but according to the law." Over the next few hours, as dawn broke over the palace, the full extent of the conspiracy became clear. Uncle Edmund had been planning the takeover for months, gradually winning over guards and nobles with promises of power and gold. If Charlotte hadn't overheard that first conversation and had the courage to report it, the plan might have succeeded. The investigation also revealed something that made Charlotte feel both proud and sad. Several palace servants and guards had noticed strange meetings and suspicious behavior, but they had been too afraid to report it. Charlotte's courage in speaking up had inspired others to come forward with information that helped piece together the full scope of the conspiracy. As the immediate crisis passed, Charlotte found herself looking at the world differently. She had learned that adults could be just as scared and confused as children, and that sometimes the right thing to do was also the most frightening thing to do. She had also learned that trust was something precious that had to be earned and protected. Most importantly, she had discovered that being a princess wasn't just about wearing pretty dresses and learning proper etiquette. Sometimes it meant making hard choices and standing up for what was right, even when you were small and afraid. The palace slowly returned to normal over the following days, but Charlotte knew that nothing would ever be quite the same. She had seen the adult world's capacity for both betrayal and loyalty, and she had played a crucial role in protecting everything she loved. Sir Marcus continued as head of the royal guard, but now Charlotte looked at him not just as a protector, but as a partner who had trusted her and believed in her when it mattered most. Their friendship had been tested in the most dangerous circumstances possible, and it had proven stronger than fear or doubt. 3 months later, the kingdom had settled into a new sense of security and trust. King William's health had slowly improved, helped perhaps by the relief of knowing his family was safe and his kingdom secure. The trials of the conspirators had been completed fairly and publicly, showing the people that justice applied to everyone, regardless of their position or family connections. Uncle Edmund had been sentenced to life imprisonment in a fortress far from the capital. During his trial, he had shown no remorse for his actions, claiming he had been trying to save the kingdom from weak leadership. But the people had seen the truth, that he had been willing to harm his own family and betray his oaths for personal power. Charlotte had been called to testify at the trial, and her clear, honest account of overhearing the first conspiracy meeting had been crucial evidence. Standing before the court, speaking truth to power, she had shown a composure that impressed everyone present. The 8-year-old princess had faced down grown men who had tried to destroy her family, and she had done it with dignity and courage. The experience had changed Charlotte in ways that would shape the rest of her life. She still enjoyed her lessons and playing in the gardens, but she also spent time with Sir Marcus learning about palace security and the responsibilities of leadership. Her parents had realized that their daughter possessed unusual wisdom and strength, and they began including her in age-appropriate discussions about kingdom affairs. "You've grown up a lot these past months," her mother observed one afternoon as they walked together through the royal gardens. "I had to," Charlotte replied simply. "Someone needed to protect our family, and the adults couldn't see what was happening." The Queen smiled at her daughter's matter-of-fact tone. "Not all the adults. Sir Marcus saw it once you showed him." "Yes, but I had to decide to trust him first," Charlotte said. "That was the hardest part, not knowing if he would believe me or think I was just a silly child making up stories." This was perhaps the most important lesson Charlotte had learned, that trust had to start somewhere, and sometimes you had to be the first person brave enough to extend it. Her decision to confide in Sir Marcus had saved her family, but it had also created a bond between them that went beyond the formal relationship between a princess and her guard. Sir Marcus had kept his promise to protect her family, but he had done something even more important. He had treated her as a person whose thoughts and observations mattered, not just as a child to be protected and ignored. The relationship between Charlotte and Sir Marcus had evolved into something unique in the palace. He continued teaching her about security and strategy, but she also taught him things about seeing the world from different perspectives. Their partnership had proven that loyalty and courage could exist between people regardless of their age or position. "Sir Marcus," Charlotte said one day as they practiced identifying potential security threats in the palace, "do you think there will be other conspiracies against our family?" Sir Marcus considered the question seriously, as he always did when Charlotte asked him something. "There might be, Princess. Power attracts people who want to take it, and there will always be those who think they know better how to rule than those who were chosen to rule." "Then we'll have to be ready," Charlotte said with the confidence of someone who had already faced the worst and survived. "Yes, we will," Sir Marcus agreed. "But now we know that we can trust each other, and we know that even the smallest voice can make the biggest difference when it speaks the truth." Charlotte nodded, understanding the deeper meaning of his words. She had learned that being royal wasn't about being better than other people. It was about serving them and protecting them, even when that service required personal sacrifice and courage. As Charlotte grew older, the story of how she saved the kingdom became legendary. Bards would sing songs about the brave princess who rang the warning bell, and children throughout the land would hear bedtime stories about her courage. But for Charlotte herself, the most important part of the story was not the dramatic rescue or the public recognition. The most important part was the moment when she decided to trust Sir Marcus with her fears and observations. That decision had taught her that real strength came not from acting alone, but from finding the right people to trust and work with. It had shown her that leaders were not people who had all the answers, but people who were brave enough to ask for help when they needed it. Years later, when Charlotte became queen, she would rule with the wisdom she had gained as an 8-year-old girl hiding behind a tapestry. She would remember that sometimes the most important information came from unexpected sources, and that listening to people, regardless of their age or position, was one of the most important skills a leader could possess. But perhaps most importantly, she would never forget Sir Marcus and the choice he made to believe in a frightened child's observations about adult conspiracies. That choice had saved a kingdom. But it had also taught her that the best kind of loyalty was the kind that saw beyond appearances to recognize truth and courage wherever they appeared. The warning bell still hung in the palace tower, cleaned and maintained now as a symbol of how vigilance and courage could protect everything worth preserving. And whenever Charlotte looked up at that tower, She remembered the night when a little girl's brave decision to ring an ancient bell had changed the course of history and proven that heroism could come in the smallest packages when guided by the largest hearts.